In this video we face the dilemma of choosing decent station canopies. We find a local station that's chose to turn its livery back 80 years, and how the use of these station buildings can reflect on our layouts. Should we buy off the shelf or in fact scratch build? And it wouldn't be complete without running a few trains on the new branch line station. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie, and be pleased to know there's no wiring in this one. A little bit of track laying, station building, trains running and lots more. So let's just crack on. Now, in the last build video I showed you how I was making up these platform surfaces. So now it's a case of now gluing them onto the top of the platforms themselves. And all I'm going to do is use ordinary cheap PVA. And then a few weights to hold it down. I must confess I have sealed the underside of these MDF strips with a cheap acrylic varnish. I just don't like MDF. I know how easy it is for it to absorb water and then kind of split and things. So all I'm going to do is put these in place sort of thing. And I'm going to go whap some of this on there and then stick some weights on. It's just a case of feeling underneath the platform to make sure that it's level on both edges. Lovely. And then plonk some weights on and go on to the next one. Now my platform surfaces are all dried and we're all kind of good to go. So now I need to put them in place. These three tracks here have to move because they were installed when I had the narrower platforms. But how close can we actually get them to our tracks? Well, as they're straight tracks, you'd think, well, you can get them really close. So obviously there's a very small gap between the coach, let's say, and the platform edge. Sounds good. Unless, of course, you have a point on alongside the platform, because that will give you clearance issues. And it's made worse when dealing with steam engines. So you'd think the platform could kind of come in here quite snug with a minimal gap then between the loco and the platform. Until, of course, the loco needs to exit this head shunt, and when it goes back, as you can see, it collides with the platform edge. So clearly you need to back it off somewhat, which then gives you a considerable gap, really, but there's no other way around it. It's not too bad for me because I don't have any steam engines except King George V. But the locos that I intend to use in this area are my Hymex and Class 25s, 26, those kind of things, which are obviously Bobo locos, if that makes sense. But still, when the loco reverses back, it still does swing out somewhat. So it's just a case of getting the platform in the right place prior to bolting it down. And of course, you know, if you've got a long coach or whatever, then that's the item you need to use to dictate exactly where this platform goes when you're installing the platform next to a point. Lovely. And of course, if this, I believe this is a medium radius electrofrog point. If it were a short radius, then I imagine the swing would be greater again. So make sure you get your point work in prior to your platforms, or of course if your platforms are in first, make sure you're testing the clearances prior to screwing down, gluing down or whatever your point work. So now with the platform in the right position, it's a case of screwing it from underneath to hold it in. I made the terrible mistake last time of screwing it from on top and putting the platform surface on. But no, if you screw it from underneath and you make a mistake, you can always sort of unscrew it and move it. So now it's just a case of drilling a couple of holes and screwing it in place. Okay. We now have both platforms in position and they're both held in with 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of thereabouts. They're in good to go. I've fitted the tracks and you may have seen this is a Pico 6-foot weigh gauge. It gives you the distances between track, both on set track and on streamline. I can't get this in there, so I've just got another one which I've naturally just trimmed the edges off, and as you can see we pop it into place and the tracks are the right distance apart. So it all looks good, even though this is a disused track, well, unless I change my mind of course. And then here's platform 1 coming in, and the clearances are not too tight, but they're certainly not too loose. What's left to do now, I need to flip the board over and re-establish the wiring, because it was all wired up before. I just need to reconfigure that, connect it back up, which is no big shakes. But the big thing is next is the Model Tech rail aligners to ensure that these tracks will line up with the other board, and it's the tracks on the other board now that have to be moved to line up with these new track locations. Well, here we are with the board in place, and hopefully you can see that there is a kind of, it's about a couple of centimeters misaligned, so I've ripped this up. I need to engineer it so it sweeps in a little more gently into that one, and similarly with this one here. This one's got a little bit further to travel, and I've got a hole here where the signal used to go, but clearly now that needs to be reconfigured over into this area. So a little bit of engineering, a bit more track work just for a change. Rip this up, and then we can eventually think about playing trains. Now I can't deny it, I've had a little rethink. It's to do with this redundant track, the derelict line. Because in my box of bits I've got an old Electro-Frog Y-shaped point, and it's not up to much really. I needed one on the branch line station, bought a new one. This one is very iffy. But what I'm thinking is, rather than install a complete new piece of track, I could fit this Y-shaped point in here and run my new piece of track kind of down here, like so. And then this line here will be my redundant track. The point won't work. I'm going to solder it so that the switch blades won't come over. If I wanted to put a point motor in it, it's a complete nightmare because the underside of this board is almost totally inaccessible. But if I do that, then it gives more meaning to that redundant track because of this line that would come back here, and then I can put a barrier up here, signs not in use and that sort of thing, to show the money is being pulled back from what is a station that's being downsized. Well, we're getting there. We are making progress, albeit somewhat slower than I'd hoped. I've used a piece of MDF just to cover the platforms to hopefully ensure that I don't damage them. And these are the next pieces of platform that go on the next section here. But I sort of needed those in place to make sure that I'm not impinging on the distances while I'm putting in these tracks. The Y point is now in, and the rails are powered from this track here. I brought the droppers up onto here and then soldered across these tracks to make sure we've got power. The rest of this, some of it has power and some of it doesn't, but obviously when it goes into this line here we don't need power, so I've used insulated rail joiners just in case there's any issues kind of on this redundant line. And there's also insulated rail joiners here, obviously because this is a frog and that is the start of a block, so that will be part of the platform to be block, as it were, within sort of train controller. Right, so I just need to trim this off and fit that and screw this one down. As you can see up this end, I've used the rail joiners across these board breaks here, and all seems well. I just need to sort of weather these tracks down now. So what have I got to do? Well, really, it's just this one last track. Now, it won't surprise you to learn it's now the following day. All the track works in, it's connected and all works fine, obviously except for the redundant track. That's obviously dead. It's an interesting view from this side because you can see here how the Y-shaped point looks sort of aesthetically pleasing as it disappears off into the layout. But let's not forget that this board still remains totally removable. That was the idea of using those joiners, because this board will have to come off again to do all the ballasting and everything else. But I'll just run the shunter up the lines to check it out to make sure it all works perfectly. So we know it works well, so it's time to fit out all the various items that I perceive we'll need in the station. But before we do that, can I just ask you to make sure you've subscribed? There's the old subscriber button in the corner there, and if you are a subscriber, please click it anyway, because YouTube have a strange habit of cancelling people's subscriptions. Rather bizarre, I know. And if you are a subscriber, don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you are enjoying the video. Right, let's fit it out. Obviously, on the next board we need the ramps to match the existing platforms. I've sprayed up the pieces of MDF. They appear to be a slightly different shade, and that's because they've yet to be varnished. So if you can just leave it to your imagination to imagine that they are finished. Obviously, in the fullness of time, I've got to wire up that signal so that she sits there and drilling through there. So a little bit of work to do in this area. And to do a bit of blending with the back seam, we've got our 5-storey Victorian tenement houses with a little bit of industry over on the left-hand side. So now we come on to the awkward situation of station buildings. Now, I had thought about having these tracks sort of to run through to show sort of the decay that they were through lines, but I opted against that. And this sort of hunk of plywood is just a placeholder for the platform and station building area. Now, I've made a couple of mistakes on this front, and here's the first one. Bought from Oxford. It's a good representation of a sort of small branch line station. Has all the bits on it, you know, no chimneys for some bizarre reason, but there we go. But in this sort of town area, with these tenements, just like they are in Weymouth as in Bournemouth, and a freight area over here, I didn't think that this was quite substantial enough. Anyway, I made another mistake later, or earlier, I can't remember which way it was now, and bought this Hornby one as well. And these two will be on a well-known auction site in the not too distant future, I imagine. Because what I really wanted here was a more substantial building, a sort of like a railway hotel or accommodation for the station master, something bigger in keeping with this area. Now, I went to a train fair as I normally do, and I buy all sorts of stuff, and there was this building here. And I sort of quite liked it, really. It's a hotel station sort of scratch build. Now, back to your imagination now, but if I sit this here with holes in the back, then the passengers could come in through this little twee front entrance, go to the ticketing, come out the back and go to the platform. Remember, platform 1 and 2. I'd have to build some kind of a fence wall here to stop passengers going on to what was platform 3 and the small freight area, so there'll be a division there. But hopefully Steve Smith from Railway Laser Lines is knocking me up a building very similar to this, sort of built on these dimensions, but with rear access, so that passengers then can come out of the back onto the platform and catch their train. So that way is sort of how we're shaping up. Obviously, we'll have to revisit the surface here. There'll be a wall along this length here, because obviously there'll be car parking out here, but it kind of rings true, and I think it's quite in keeping with what's going on. And then we get to the dreadful question of station canopies, and this one for me has been a nightmare. Now, some time ago, a generous subscriber from Midsummer Norton, I won't tell you his name, but embarrass him, gave me a box of stuff. Now, within that box was this platform canopy made by Dapol. Now, I bought myself several of these. I think I bought 6 up to now. They're about £8.40 each, I believe. But if you choose to invest in these, you really need to know that this is a very, very tired mould. There is a great deal of work to go in to get these up to some kind of a workable condition because of the amount of flash and everything else on it. And it's a difficult kit to make. But what other choices do you have? Well, if you recall from your, I don't know, schoolboy days, perhaps there was the Hornby canopy, but let's move on because that is somewhat rather train setty. So what have I done? Well, as I said, I bought some of these, but if I build these kits and put them together, then obviously these end panels aren't required because you wouldn't have an end panel, going on to the next one. So what I've done, the quiet evenings in my kitchen whilst Margaret's watching a bit of telly, Strictly and things like that, I've constructed these. And it's the skeleton structure to that kit. Now, as you can see, there are 4 cross members. So if I were to put those there, but of course I don't need the next cross member on this one because I want it to run on the end of there. And then similarly with this one, I don't need one on there because that will come on to the end of here. Hopefully that will line up adequately for you to get an idea of what it looks like. And the skeletal frame of it is okay. It's the right width for the platform and that sort of thing. And then you have this roof structure, which is an absolute nightmare to put together. It's dreadful, with all these little cross spars, and I've been sellotaping it down on a sort of a tea tray, and then gluing these bits in, and then sellotaping this section down and trying to glue these bits in. One of the bits was missing, so I used a toothpick. And as you can see, that sort of pops over there and the structure continues. If you've used these, please drop me a line because I think they are absolutely dreadful. And I'm actually considering cutting off every other one of these roof spars just to make it, it's such a dreadful waste of your life sitting here doing this. But the other thing I did think of doing is putting another small section just on here to give it the right sort of length for the platform to line up with the drain section that Steve Smith has made for me. But this is what I've been using. This is not a recommendation at all. These really are hard going. But it also is worth mentioning now about colour schemes, because I got myself into a pickle then on this being, in Somerset, where I am, it's a GWR sort of Somerset and Dorset area, but this is based on a GWR theme, and the canopy colours and the building colours and all that, because very close to where I live is Castle Carey railway station. Now, a very wealthy South African entrepreneur owns a facility known as the Newt, and it's a rather posh hotel, let's say, where Paul McCartney and people there stay there when they're doing the Glastonbury Pop Festival, and the helicopters come and go. But for the likes of me, I get a local discount, and Margaret and I can walk around the woods and see the deer and all that sort of thing. But the Newt, or the owner, has put a great deal of money into Castle Carey railway station and built a sort of a high-end cafe there, but also refurbished the buildings. And as you can see here, this isn't the GWR chocolate and cream that we're used to, because this colour scheme, I believe, came into being around about 1906, 1907, when it was chocolate and cream and came into this scheme. And this scheme then has run through up until the end of the Second World War, when the Big Four then became British Rail, and then the chocolate and cream came back into the Western region. And here are the befores and after photos to show the difference in those colours. And it's the chocolate and cream that nowadays we all recognise. And then looking back at the branch line station from Hornby, you can see that this one is actually in chocolate and cream. Bit of a lazy model really, because the guttering should all be in chocolate along the edges, and also some of the structure that's underneath the canopy. However, Hornby also produced a nice little signal box in the previous colour scheme, which I do think is rather nice. So this is a colour scheme that would have been around about sort of 1906, 1907, up to when the Big Four amalgamated. I think it was in 1948, and then subsequently they would be painted into chocolate and cream. But of course many survived in this condition for many years after that. Right, so chocolate and cream it is. So I just needed to try and figure out which paints are which, but because Phoenix, they do the chocolate and cream for the rolling stock, which is all high gloss, but I'm actually trying to source an enamel paint that's more suitable for this lot here, because obviously these skeleton structures need to be sprayed for initially, probably with a grey primer, and then all this metalwork would need to be sprayed in the chocolate colour, as would the feet of the posts, but the centre of the post would then be cream, and then obviously the sections of the structure, these end panels would obviously need to be in cream along with these, but of course you need to put guttering in, so there's lots more to do. So as I said, this kit is going to be a real challenge, especially when there's so much of it, but hey, the winter evenings are coming. One problem I did notice during that little running session there was this particular point here. This frog is unpowered when this is in the thrown position. So for that to be, the only way that can happen really is an internal fault within the tortoise point motor. So sadly it's time to dig that one out. One thing you may have noticed is I put a siphon H in that disused platform, and that's the sort of thing that would come in handy for the freight crew during their unloading and loading. Well, I do hope you found that short running session interesting. It shows the sort of playability of the area with platforms 1 and 2 doing the passenger work. Obviously you've got a bit of added interest on that disused line, and obviously now you've got the freight lines coming into being. So we have sort of some interesting evolutions that we can do. The old Class 14, the teddy bear shunter, needs a bit of a service. It was a bit creaky, I must confess, but everything else seems to work okay, bar that strange frog on that point motor, on that point. But hey, these things don't last forever. Well, hopefully you'll agree that we've made some good progress over the last few days, and that branch line area now is really starting to take shape. Of course, the whole board has to come off again now to get on with the intricacies of ballasting and all the rest of it. It's trying to plan out the roads where they're going to go. So stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting evolution as we take that one forward. Next weekend, it's the Great Electric Train Show up at Milton Keynes. So I'll be there on the Saturday and Sunday, and hopefully you will too. If you do see me there, please come over and say hello. It's great to keep up with people and see what you're doing to your layouts, and find out, you know, what influences you, and what else I can provide from a YouTuber's point of view to keep your interest going. Lovely. Anyway, in the meantime, as usual, I'd like to thank the patrons, because it's the patrons that make it all possible, and the patrons get this video a day before the general release, so they get it without adverts. Another little bonus to tick in the old patrons box. There's the subscriber button. Subscribing is free, so please don't hesitate to click that, and a video here and here, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks a lot, take care. Bye-bye.